A story of ambition, royal intrigue and imprisonment in the Tower of London.
Richard had a claim to the throne. It was not necessary for him to kill the princes, the sons of Edward IV, to take the throne.
They disappear in the tower soon after. Some people believe that they were murdered.
Two small skeletons, buried in a wooden box, forgotten under a staircase in the Tower of London. For centuries, the world believed they belonged to two vanished children, Prince Edward and Prince Richard, the royal brothers who stepped into the tower in 1483 and were never seen again. For most of history, these remains were nothing more than a grim symbol, a haunting question mark at the heart of British royalty.
A story of ambition, royal intrigue and imprisonment in the Tower of London.
And if we were to put that to an ordinary jury, was Richard guilty beyond a reasonable doubt of killing his nephews in the Tower of London? I'm confident that I would get an acquittal every time.
But today, after hundreds of years of refusals, sealed tombs, and political roadblocks, science has finally been allowed to speak. Modern DNA analysis and radiocarbon dating have cracked open the marble urn in Westminster Abbey and revealed a truth so clear, so precise, so definitive, that it changes everything.
DNA is telling us. So doing the Y chromosome work, I found that there wasn't a link between Richard III and the male line relatives who are alive today.
This is the moment the 5-century silence breaks. The moment science solves the ultimate cold case. And to understand the scale of what was just uncovered, we must return to the beginning, where power, fear, blood, and ambition collided in the darkest corners of a medieval fortress. The truth is here, but to grasp it, we need to go deeper. The DNA that shook history. The secret scientific project began quietly. No royal announcements, no press releases. Just a small group of elite forensic specialists, some of the same minds who confirmed the identity of Richard III when he was found beneath a Leicester car park, standing before an ancient marble urn.
Tomorrow, the king will be reinterred at Leicester Cathedral, nearly 530 years after his death. History hasn't been kind to Richard, vilified by Shakespeare, a monster with a hunchback, murderer of his nephews in the Tower. Then, 3 years ago, a fresh interest in Richard led to the discovery of his suspected remains. And it took 2 Canadians to help solve the mystery.
Inside it lay bones handled by workmen in 1674, later touched by examiners in 1933, and exposed to centuries of humidity, dust, and decay. Getting DNA would be nearly impossible. But the team had one advantage.
In the midst of all the detail here, we can find a reference to a bequest to her son. Also, I bequeath to my son, Sir Giles, his father's chain, which was young King Edward V's.
The petrous bone, a dense structure hidden deep inside the skull, renowned for preserving ancient genetic material better than any other part of the body. From that tiny bone, they extracted a tiny sample. From that sample, they chased mitochondrial DNA, the kind passed almost unchanged from mother to child. If these bones belonged to the 2 lost princes, their mitochondrial DNA had to match their mother, Elizabeth Woodville. The challenge? She died in 1492.
This is an official copy of the will of a woman called Margaret Capel. She died in 1522. She was the widow of a very wealthy and powerful Londoner called Sir William Capel.
So the team traced her all-female lineage across 5 centuries, identifying a living descendant of Elizabeth Woodville's sister. A simple cheek swab was all they needed. Then came the comparison. When the sequences appeared on the laboratory screen, the room fell silent. A perfect match. Not close, not likely, perfect. Both skeletons in the urn were the biological sons of Elizabeth Woodville. Not imposters, not victims of misidentification, Their story ends in the tower. But knowing who they were only deepens the greater question. When did their lives end? And who ended them? Radiocarbon dating delivered the second bombshell, a forensic window of late 1483 to early 1484. Not only do we now know the boys are real, but we know when they died, with a precision never before possible. That single date range detonates centuries of theories and points directly at one man. Before we reveal him, we need to understand how England became the perfect storm for a royal disappearance. The year the kingdom fell apart. England in 1483 was hanging by a thread. The Wars of the Roses had torn the nation to pieces. The Yorkists had finally clawed their way to victory under Edward IV, a towering, charismatic king who brought a fragile peace to the land. He had two sons, Prince Edward, age 12, Prince Richard, age 9. The future looked secure until the king suddenly died at 40. His passing unleashed chaos. A 12-year-old heir cannot rule. Someone needed to guide the kingdom until he came of age. Edward IV had chosen his trusted younger brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, a respected commander and loyal defender of the crown. But there was one problem: the Queen's powerful Woodville family. Ambitious, wealthy, hungry for influence, they had no intention of letting Richard control the young king. When Richard rode south toward London after his brother's death, he intercepted the young king on the road, arrested the Queen's relatives, and declared himself protector. Not long after, young Edward was escorted inside the Tower of London. This was standard. Kings traditionally lived there before coronation. But then Richard did something fateful. He pressured the Queen, who was hiding in sanctuary, to surrender her second son, Richard, Duke of York, promising he merely wanted to keep the brothers together. She agreed. Both boys entered the fortress. Neither ever left. But gradually the sightings grew fewer, then stopped. The trap was set. The stage was ready for one of history's most ruthless political maneuvers. And everything began with a sermon.
Is not a fool. If you usurp a king, there's only one thing you do with him. Sooner or later, you kill him.
The legal masterstroke. On June 22, 1483, a priest named Ralph Shaw stood before a London crowd and dropped a bombshell. He claimed King Edward IV had been secretly engaged to another woman before marrying Elizabeth Woodville. In that era, a pre-contract of marriage was legally binding. If true, Edward's marriage to Elizabeth was invalid. Invalid marriage means illegitimate children. Illegitimate children cannot inherit the throne, which means both princes, Edward and Richard, were suddenly declared bastards. With the boys disqualified, the chain of succession pointed to one man, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. 4 days later, a parliament filled with Richard's supporters offered him the throne. On July 6th, he became King Richard III, and in the Tower, silence. The boys had become a threat, a living alternative to Richard's rule, a rallying point for rebellion. Across England, whispers spread, "Where are the princes?" Richard never provided proof of life. And for many, that silence spoke louder than any confession. But is it the full truth? Because for centuries, two other men have stood in the shadows of suspicion. Before we identify the guilty, 1, we need to eliminate the innocent. Clearing the suspects. For half a millennium, 3 names have dominated the suspect list: Richard III, Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham, Henry Tudor. The new scientific timeline finally lets us test these theories. Let's start with Buckingham. He had motive, he had power, he had access. And just 3 months after Richard became king, Buckingham launched a violent rebellion against him. Some believed Buckingham killed the boys to undermine Richard's legitimacy and seize the throne himself. But carbon-14 evidence places the boys' deaths in late 1483 to early 1484. Buckingham's rebellion was already crushed by then. His execution came quickly afterward. The timeline doesn't fit. The science clears him. Which brings us to the greatest rival Richard ever had, Henry Tudor. Henry Tudor spent his life in exile, gathering foreign support to invade England and seize the crown. If he had found the princes alive after his victory at Bosworth Field in 1485, eliminating them would have secured his precarious claim. This theory has long appealed to the defenders of Richard III, who argued that the Tudors needed a villain and created one. But the scientific window strikes this idea down. The boys died in 1483-1484. Henry Tudor didn't set foot in England until 1485. The DNA clears him completely. That leaves one name, the only man who had custody of the boys, the only man whose power depended on their disappearance, the only man the scientific timeline cannot absolve, Richard III. But before we reach the final conclusion, there's one more layer we must peel back, because understanding Richard's mind in 1483 requires understanding the world he believed he was fighting for.
He was 30 years old when he became King of England. In the years before that, he'd grown up in the heat of the Wars of the Roses during some of the worst years. He'd spent 2 periods in exile when he was 8 and again when he was 18.
Inside the mind of a king. Richard of Gloucester was not born a monster. He was shaped by catastrophe. As a child, he survived battles that wiped out members of his family. He lived through political betrayals, shifting alliances, and a war so brutal it reshaped England forever. He learned one lesson: the throne is life itself. Lose it, and you lose everything. So when his brother died and the Woodvilles surged toward power, Richard believed, perhaps genuinely, that only he could save England from corruption.
Richard III is absolutely safe on the throne. He's been adjudged king by Parliament. Parliament, or the 3 estates of the realm, have ruled that Edward IV was legally married to Eleanor Talbot. He has nothing to fear from any of Edward IV's children.
Did he convince himself the princes were illegitimate? Did he rationalize that their removal was necessary for peace? Or did he succumb to fear? The fear that someone, somewhere, would challenge his fragile authority. We will never know his mind, but we now know his actions, because the science has spoken, and its message is clear. The final verdict here is what the genetic and radiocarbon evidence proves beyond doubt. The 2 skeletons found in 1674 are the sons of Elizabeth Woodville. They died between late 1483 and early 1484. This is the exact period when Richard III held total control over them and total responsibility for their fate. The timeline eliminates Henry Tudor. The timeline eliminates Buckingham. The timeline eliminates every theory of escape, imposters, or secret rescue. There is only one remaining possibility. The princes were eliminated under the rule of Richard III. For 540 years, the world debated, speculated, theorized, and argued. But the case is finally solved. The lost princes of the Tower are no longer lost. What their bones mean for us. Their story is more than a royal tragedy. It is a reminder of the fragility of power, how children became pieces on a political chessboard, sacrificed to secure a crown. And yet, their bones also represent something extraordinary, the triumph of truth over time. These 2 boys, silenced for centuries, finally have their voices back, their identities restored, their fate revealed, their story completed.
More claims that Richard III ordered the murder of his nephews. He was the one who organised it and employed 2 henchmen really to carry out his dirty work.
History tends to bury the weak and glorify the powerful. But today, the powerless speak first. Science, not kings, gets the last word. And that word is truth. After half a millennium, the darkness lifts. The tower's secret is no longer a whisper. It is evidence, data, DNA, certainty. But the final question is one only we can answer. Does the truth close the story, or open a new chapter in how we judge the past? Because now that we finally know what happened to the princes in the tower, we must decide what their story means for us.